G'day you mob, how's it going? Welcome to this episode of Aussie English, the number one podcast for anyone and everyone wanting to learn Australian English. This is an episode of the Goss where I sit down with my old man, my dad, and we have a chinwag, we have a chat about the week's news. We talk about the gossip, right? The stuff that's going on in the news. So today we talk a little bit again about racism and the riots going on in America and how they've kind of spilled out into the rest of the world and brought up questions of racism and inequality in places like Australia with the Indigenous people here. We talk about Rio Tinto. Accidentally blowing up an Indigenous sacred site in Australia. We talk about the glossy black cockatoos first returning to Melbourne after a 150-year absence. And then we talk about big cats in the Australian wild. Were they ever let go and released into the wild here? Is there a population of large pumas, tigers, lions, some kind of big cat running around Australia? Who knows? Anyway, without any further ado, guys, let's get into the content today. Smack the kookaburra on the bum and let's go. I had a story here, so it's interesting how much the rest of the world is jumping on these riots happening in the US, right? So you had, I think there were people protesting in Great Britain in front of the American embassy, and you're like, what do you make of that?
Yeah, it's a bit bizarre. There were protests apparently in Trafalgar Square, which is, well, it's close enough to the American embassy, but the American embassy's sort of in a little corner thing in London that, you know, if you had 10 protesters outside, they'd be arrested for, you know, not social distancing. So, whereas Trafalgar Square's bigger.
But do you think those are Americans or are they British people who have just taken up this cause?
Take up the cause.
Yeah.
And if as far as I'm concerned, people can take up whatever cause they like. If it's passive, peaceful protest, you know, I'm surprised, and there probably are people around Australia sitting out front of US embassies and so on saying, you know, well, there's one embassy, but, you know, US consulates certainly in Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane, and protesting. But they're not going to make the news because nobody cares. You know, if there's 100 people sitting down outside waving flags going, stop it.
Yeah. It's really bizarre. I don't know. I feel like we have a lot of problems, and so it's weird to latch onto another country's systemic
problems of your own too.
Yeah, well, they have racist problems with African Americans, which we have, you know, effectively none of in Australia, obviously, because we're not America.
No.
But there aren't very many African.
We certainly have an issue with Indigenous people, deaths in custody of Indigenous people.
Well, that's what I was wanting to bring up. But do we? Because I was looking up the stats, so I saw a thing here from The Guardian that was deaths in our backyard, 432 Indigenous deaths in custody since 2008, and I was like, okay. But it's weird because these articles don't contrast the stats. They show we've had these deaths, and over the last 10 years, they've increased by this amount. Well, and that's the thing that sort of shits me, because I was looking into it, and I'm like, all right, so I'm going to go to the Australian Institute of Criminology and the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and have a look at the actual stats of deaths in custody, and like, how did these people die? How does it compare to non-Indigenous people? And when you look at it, so the stats that I have in front of me was 2,608 deaths in custody in Australia since 1979, 1980. 500 of those have been Indigenous, which is 19% of those deaths.
Yeah.
And the Indigenous people make up 28% of the population in the prisons.
Yeah, but they make up single-digit percentage of the population.
So 100%.
It's not the number of people who are dying in prison.
There's more of them in prison.
That is the problem.
But I guess the problem is that they're playing it up like I don't like when the story gets twisted, because it feels like it's, yes, we want to resolve this issue that there are too many, at least proportionately, Indigenous people in jail, but at the same time I don't like twisting the story to make it sound like Indigenous people are being targeted, put in jail, and then killed, like this American person, you know, had his neck leaned
and look,
on.
there have been cases. There was a case last year of an Indigenous woman who died because of maltreatment and being ignored.
But I guess those are individual cases.
And they're anecdotal cases. The law will take care of those.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not a statistic. Anecdotes are not statistics. But so there are certainly people who are dying by inappropriate behaviour of custodians in prisons. But I think the big issue, as you say, is the proportion of Indigenous people who are in prison. And mostly they're in prison for trivial things.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem.
But it comes from both sides, right? So they are in jail for relatively trivial things, but at the same time they're in jail because they've broken the law.
Yeah, and it's
so
not that we
you
put them
need
in
to-
jail or not, but
Yeah.
we've got to understand the sociology of why
That's-
they are committing these mostly misdemeanor or trivial crimes.
Well, that's it. It feels like it's, I keep getting skin cancers and I don't know why, and I'm just going to remove them, right? That's
Yeah.
the best thing. And it's like, well, actually, no, it's because you're sunbathing with no sunscreen on, right? It's kind of like we need to find out why are these people doing these things. And I think, at least for the Indigenous thing, the limited thing that I understand is that it's a lot more to do with economics,
of course it is.
education and social issues that,
And
like a ground-up
it's social
approach is more
issues. It's the
important.
same problem that we were talking about with the lower socioeconomic African Americans, is that if you feel like you are unvalued in your country, and they see this as their country, not just a country they share with us, but it is their country, they've been here for 60,000 years, then you're going to be more likely to be drinking alcohol, taking drugs, committing small petty crimes. And therefore you are more likely to be engaged in the legal system, and being in prison.
How do we ever get past that? Because it seems to be
It's
a story
really
that's
hard
played out with Indigenous peoples all over the world.
is.
It's not
Yeah.
just unique to Australia. It's, you have the same sorts of Indigenous issues in America.
Yeah, North America, Canada and the United States.
Brazil.
Brazil.
But how do you ever get past that until people, because it's like either the government just gives back all the land and moves everyone
look at
out
South
who
Africa.
isn't. Yeah. Wow. But look how well that's going.
Yeah, that's what I mean. South Africa has been politically resurrected since the 1980s and 90s, but socially and economically, it's going down the toilet.
Yeah. Well, but the weird thing about South Africa is the fact that you have the country has been effectively handed over to the Zulu people, who were a tribe that weren't originally from South Africa. No. They just ended up making up the majority of South Africa over the last 60 or 70 years, where their numbers have gone crazy. And they were politically active. And they were politically active. Yeah. It's like no one gives a shit about the San people that live, the other African tribes that live in South Africa, but the Zulu people who now have control are very, it's all about us more so than all of the other African tribes. But yeah, how do you ever deal with that, right? Like it's just crazy. But yeah, I was going to ask, do you think we live in a post-truth era? Like, is it getting...
We do.
People, what do you make of that?
What do I make of it in the sense of who's to blame, or what do I make of it in a sense of how do we cope with it?
It seems to be that it isn't... I mean, there are people to blame, but it seems that a lot of people are latching on to this behaviour too. A lot of people seem to be criticising Trump that he doesn't defer to science, defer to evidence, but then it seems like a lot of people will just eat up stories about political issues that they side. They're on the same side. They don't look into it at all. They lap it up and then share it around, and it self-perpetuates.
Oh, it is. And that's... I've ranted about this several times in these episodes. I blame... And this is a sort of generic statement, but I blame the media in the broad context of media. And it is perfectly understandable why, because the media are just... They're a commercial organisation, or they're multiple commercial organisations. Their job is to make money. They're businesses. They know they can make money by being sensational or just telling crap.
Yeah.
Because, and particularly now in a digital world that we live in now, is that stories are ephemeral. They come and they go in seconds. And if you want something to stick, it's got to be controversial.
Oh, it's weird.
You can't just tell the news.
I've
You
seen
can't
the
just
science
report.
behind that, where people need to, if they feel outraged, they're much more likely to share stories.
Exactly.
To comment.
And it's the sharing. It's not the major media outlets that are the problem. They are still doing a reasonable job, but what happens is that they rely now for advertising on people. Twitter is the problem. Not just Twitter, but it's the Twitter concept.
Social media.
It's not just social media. Social media in terms of YouTube, Facebook, Instagram are one end of social media where people are mostly, Facebook's a bit different, but say YouTube and Instagram, people are creating content. So they are providing some value to the universe, you could argue. In some cases, that value is questionable, but they're at least doing something to get it out there. Facebook is mostly people don't get on Facebook to have 1 million followers. Most people get on Facebook to share their lives with their friends and relatives.
Connect with their family and everyone, yeah.
Twitter, on the other hand, is purely about ego.
Yeah.
And the best way you can succeed on Twitter is to be as outrageous as you possibly can. And the best way to be outrageous is to do it in a second-hand way. That all you're doing is you're just retweeting other people's crap.
And responding to it.
But you don't even need to respond. All you have to do is retweet it. And that's in itself has given it some credence.
I never got onto it.
I don't have a Twitter account.
I share some of the Aussie English
I will
stuff,
put my hand up and confess my bias straight away. I do not have a Twitter account. I'm going to be the last person in the universe. Well, actually, I probably won't, because Twitter will die within the next 20 years and there'll be a bunch of people who have never got on it. But so I think that's the problem, is that the media now, it's the 10-second grabs politically.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said this, you go on, and I'll
it's so weird that
story.
we do have, it seems to be two extremes, right? There's the side of us that is still being pulled towards 10-second grabs and the sound bites, and on the media they just want, let's have a debate about racism in Australia with 13 panel members for the next 6 minutes. Yeah. It's like, that is not the...
It's hardly a deep and meaningful debate.
Exactly, but then there's
all
the
they
other
want is the
side of us.
controversial soundbite.
But then there's the other side of us where there's a lot more people now diving into intellectual long-form discussions, like why the Joe Rogan podcast is doing so well, why there are so many other podcasts out there and TV shows and YouTube channels now with conversations that are up to 3 hours or more long, and people will watch the entire thing and lap it up, millions of people.
Yes.
So it is funny to see that, it's going both ways, that it doesn't seem like, we're all gravitating towards just, sound bites and...
No, we're not, but...
There's a thirst there for both.
There is a thirst. Well, I think there's a thirst for the meaningless soundbite, not necessarily among the public. Yeah.
Well,
I don't know anybody who wants that.
I think
if that's all you're exposed to,
our concentration span though has been whittled down quite a bit too, at least in terms of surfing the net with social media. Because even I find, like, if a video takes too long to load up on Facebook, I'm like, fuck it, next. Yeah. Or if something goes for too long, I'm like, next.
Yeah. Oh no, but you see, if you're interested in those arguments and discussions, you have to go and look for it.
Yes.
You're not presented with it.
Yeah.
Whereas the things that you are presented with on television news, radio news, internet news, and social media is the 10-second crappy soundbite that is deliberately made to be controversial in the first place.
Yeah.
Often has the only justification it has for being there is that it's based on social media. A story now, in the modern news media, a story now is 10 people on Twitter said... Yeah, and I'm sorry, that's not a story. If you said, here's the story, and all of a sudden you've got 10,000 people responding on Twitter, that's a story. But you don't create news by going in and saying, oh, well, look, these people think this. I don't care what Fred and Joe blogs think. What I want to know is, I might care about what Fred and Joe blogs respond to the real story, but tell me the story. And it happens all the time. Even the ABC, which used to be the standard by which I held television news and journalism, even they do it now, where every story they tell, like some medical specialist has come up with a new way of a new solution to a particular disease. Here's a new drug, wonder drug. You can guarantee that will be the headline, that 5 seconds, new wonder drug created. You might, if you're lucky, be told who the doctor's name was, or the medical team or the research team that came up with it. What you'll find is one person that it has been tried on, and you get there, here's the sob story. I've suffered from blah, blah, blah disease my entire life, and I've been crippled, and now it's all wonderful. Fine. But show me the data. Tell me the story. And you can tell that story in an interesting way, but we've dumbed down news now to the point where all people are interested in is anecdote. Yeah. And anecdote, as I said before, anecdote is not statistics. It might be true, But who cares if one thing has happened to one other person?
So how do we get
That's what we get presented
How
with.
do we dig our way out of this hole?
Look, I'm hoping that what we will end up with is a reaction by the major news media. Murdoch's not going to do it, but the major news media, a reaction to politicians in particular, and business, but politicians mainly, who now thrive on that. Yeah. Politicians are all so cleverly media trained these days that regardless of what they think about the universe, they are trained to... No, they're trained to go...
canned responses.
You've got 10 seconds. You've got to get your message through in 10 seconds. Yeah. Make sure you run down the opposition. Or if you're the opposition, make sure you run down the government.
Yeah, I saw something...
Because that's all that anybody wants.
I saw something recently on Tony Abbott. So he was the leader of the Liberal Party for a few years after Gillard, and he was running some sort of campaign effectively just saying the same soundbite.
Yeah.
And it took him about 3 months, and then it finally latched on in the media, and he ended up, getting, I can't remember what it was, but it had to do with renewable energy or something, and they threw that out, and they effectively, undid all this hard work simply because it was done by the Labor Party. Yeah. But he did it by just repeating this soundbite that didn't have any evidence behind it until people believed it, right?
And we have a few journalists now who don't take crap from politicians, but they're very few. I think I've told the story, whether I've told it on this show or not is a different story, but I really miss Jana Wendt. Jana was one of my journalistic heroes. Now, to say I knew her would be a bit outrageous. I had met her a couple of times. We were at Melbourne University at the same time.
Yeah. And
she was a fairly outspoken sort of radical then. And she was one of those journalists who I can remember it was a Channel 9, a current affair. You would not believe that a current affair, which is now a news magazine, controversial news magazine, telling anecdotal stories. I remember on a current affair years and years ago where the treasurer at the time came on and she asked him a question and he didn't answer it. He just, you did the usual political obfuscation and she just said, you didn't answer my question.
Yeah.
And he said the same thing again. She said, this is my show. You're on here for 15 minutes. I'm going to ask the same question for 15 minutes until you answer it. And he got angry about it. He said, well, you can't. And I said, yes, I can. You're a public servant. It's my job to ask you to justify what you're doing. And she put him under the hammer to the point where he did answer it, and he didn't like it because she knew what he had to say, and he didn't like it. And then he refused to come on again. And she said, "Fine, I'll get the shadow treasurer to come on and tell me next time." And funnily enough, he came back again a month later, and he got the same treatment. And we have a couple of journalists, TV journalists, and TV is by far the most powerful medium for that sort of stuff, particularly if it's live, because people can't get off the hook. Whereas radio, you can't see somebody squirming. Print media, it's always edited. So live television interviews are the best way of dealing with idiot politicians. But the media now are so controlled, most of it is controlled by Murdoch and other right-wing people, that they're never going to do that while we've got right-wing governments in.
Well, they might only and the ABC, with the other side.
And the ABC, which is one that does have most of those people now, they're not going to do it, because the government just keeps cutting their funding. Over the last 10 years, their funding has been cut more than half. And so what happens if the ABC start criticising this government? Oh, well, sorry, we've got more cuts next year. And they're not going to say because we don't like you. Yeah. But that's really what's going to happen. And yes, you can accuse me of being a conspiracy theorist, but it's a reality. It's whether it's a cause or effect, it's happening. So.
All right, let's move on to some of these other stories. And I've got Rio Tinto. I've got one here. Rio Tinto apologised to the WA traditional owners after destroying significant Aboriginal site.
Yeah,
what happened with that story, Dad? Do you want to tell that one?
No, you can go.
Well, so
I'll do the colour commentary around the outside of it.
There was an Indigenous site that was like 46,000 years old in Western Australia.
In the Pilbara.
Yeah, in the Pilbara. So the cave was used for 2 caves there, I think, were used as shelter during the last ice ages. Rio Tinto is a large mining company, right? Who
Second
owns
or
this
third
one?
biggest. Rio Tinto is the company.
Yeah, I don't know if it's one of these large billionaires in Australia, though, or if it's just a large corporation.
I don't think so. No.
But they detonated a bunch of explosives in part of the Jukin Gorge, destroying 2 ancient rock shelters, and they devastated the Putu, Kunti, Karama, and Pinikura people. And so the mining giant, it was granted approval for the work at Brockman 4 iron ore project in 2013. And subsequent archaeological excavation revealed a bunch of artifacts, grinding stones, bones sharpened into tools, and a 4,000-year-old braided hair. And Rio, it's saying that the PKKP people, the Putu, Kuntu, Kunti, Kamara, Pinikura people didn't make clear their concerns about preserving the site during consultation. What exactly is happening there? Because it doesn't seem to be a unique story. It seems to be something that's happening again and again and again, especially in these areas.
Yeah. Well, I think there's three parts to this. There's two sides and there's somewhere in the middle. The two sides are that clearly there are some highly sacred sites among many Indigenous people in these areas. And these are also areas where there has been, continuous occupation of that land by Indigenous people. This is not just somebody who's living in Sydney going, my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother might have come from there, therefore it's important to me. And that's not to say that's not a legitimate concern, but these are people who are still living in this area. And on the other side, we've got mining companies who have been granted rights by government to mine in these places, and mostly they do the right thing because they have agreements with the traditional owners of the land over where they will mine and so on. Now, I don't know the details in this specific
sometimes, if not all the time, get certain
they get
percentages of money from the ore
rightly so. If you're granted traditional ownership status, you effectively own the land, and so you've got the right to sell the mining rights on that land. Now, I think, and I don't know the details of what happened in the background of this case, but I think there have been cases where, in the past, unfortunately, we've had some Indigenous people or Indigenous groups come out afterwards and go, "But hang on, that was a sacred site." And this bland accusation that keeps coming out of the sort of the Andrew Bolts of the world, the right wing people, is, well, you're only told it was significant after it was gone. Yeah. And I don't think this is the case in this one. And I also don't think that's the case at all in many. I think that's just a standard sort of, we'll throw that little whitewater out. It's victim blaming of simply saying, you're claiming now that we didn't tell you what we're going to do. I'm sorry. You told us you're going to blow this up. We said no, and you did it anyway. Is the middle ground somewhere. And yes, you can have Rio Tinto come out and apologise, but what's their apology worth? You can't put a financial value on 46,000 years of cultural heritage. You can't put financial value on 100 years of financial heritage. There was a case, not Indigenous case, but there was a case of an old hotel in Fitzroy, in Carlton.
I remember that. I was walking past there to go to Melbourne Uni all the time.
Which
like
was,
I drank there a few times.
Which was purchased by a developer.
Yeah.
He applied for the right to pull it down, to build a new restaurant, hotel sort of thing there. Yeah. And he was told, no, it's heritage listed. You can't do it. Here are the conditions that you can renovate. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't the old dodgy brothers insurance job where they just burn it down one night. He just got the demolition team in and demolished it.
Did he do that? I can imagine him having, thought, I'm going to get an approval for this. I'll, submit the documents. I'm assuming it's going to be a yes, so I'll just start knocking it down. And then he's
told no.
Or was he told no? And then he did it anyway. What did he think was going to happen?
Exactly. And fortunately, in this case, the government came out and said, okay, you're going to pay us back for the value of that property and you're going to have to rebuild it.
Really?
At your cost.
No kidding.
Has
it been rebuilt?
I don't know. I'm sure that's still sitting going around the circle of appeals courts. But that's again one of those. And this is only a 120 or 130-year-old heritage. But once you've knocked it down, he can rebuild it. But it's no longer the same building.
Rio Tinto can rebuild the caves.
Can rebuild the caves, but it's not the same. Yeah. And I think that's the problem, is that we've got a situation now where this is a multi-billion-dollar company who are going to make hundreds of millions of dollars out of the action that they have taken they can pay whatever fine they like. They can say sorry and go, oh, sorry, here's $20 million. Shut up and go away.
That keeps happening, right? Where you have this whole,
it's just
we'll ask,
it's just a
you'll
cost
say
of doing
no,
business.
We'll do it anyway, and then we'll be like, sorry. And then, what's the fine? Here, have it.
Exactly.
That's nothing.
The fine should be, and the trouble is that the government, and look, we're the government. I mean, we are the government of Australia. But the government is so tied in, and our financial system is so tied into coal and iron ore sales, international sales on the export market, that the government cannot come out and not fine, but they can't come out and treat Rio Tinto the way they should be.
Yeah.
Yeah. If
I
was sitting there and I were the mining minister, I would just simply say, well, you've clearly demonstrated your incapacity to deal with this. You are not going to create any new mine in the Pilbara without a 5-year environmental plan that involves the local Indigenous people and blah, 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 blah. And government's got their hands off it. This has been an independent group of people, that, and, so, but that won't happen. It'll just be the slap on the wrist, sorry. Oh, okay. Thanks for your apology. Carry on. And I'm not opposed to iron ore mining. That's what we make.
You just do it correctly, though.
Yeah, you just do it appropriately, and there are plenty of other areas. It's not like there's any shortage of fucking iron ore in northwestern Australia. It's one giant bloody iron ore mine. All they got to do is keep digging holes. And yes, there are places where it will be better value to them. Yeah. It's closer to the coast. It's easy to extract. It's higher quality ore. Blah blah blah. But seriously, this should be the conservative part of me just sits there and says, if there's any question about whether you mine there or not, you don't, because there are plenty of other places doing it. This is not like it's a shortage. It's not like the uranium mines in Cockatoos, where and I'm not really a big fan of mining uranium, but assuming that we are going to allow uranium mining.
G'day, mate. That was the first half of this episode of The Goss. If you would like to continue watching or continue listening to this episode, make sure that you sign up for the premium podcast or Academy memberships at aussieenglish.com.au, where you will get full access to these entire episodes of this series and much, much more. You can go check that out using the links below, or just go to aussieenglish.com.au. Once again, thank you so much for joining me, mate, and I will see you next time. Peace.